Call the meeting to order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call of members, please.
Gary Ross.
Here.
Anthony Grass. Carl Kinski. Here. Justin Donovan. Here. Gina Bryant. Kathy Waltz. Amanda Hutchings.
Here.
And Joe Prince. We have a quorum.
Approval of the agenda. On the agenda, we have discussion of comprehensive plan, discussion of zoning ordinance, home occupations, discussion of zoning ordinances, marijuana-related uses, discussion of zoning ordinance, tiny homes. Got a motion? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes from January 5th, 2023.
Motion approved.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Introduction of evidence.
So we have the municipal ordinances, comprehensive plan, and then I sent you staff reports, associated documents, Thursday or Friday. That's all I have for that.
Make a motion to approve.
Got a motion?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Citizen input. Anybody out here for anything other than old business? Discussion comprehensive.
So the survey just wrapped up. It was available for approximately a month. I do not have numbers. I apologize. I asked for that from the RPC, and the gentleman that's doing our comprehensive plan is on vacation. I believe we landed between 400 and 500. 500 was the goal. But either way, it'll be some good results. Once those results are gathered, come back to the steering committee. Justin is on that steering committee. Talk to some of the staff here. So we'll go on step. So I believe, while we won't be on track to hit the original end goal, they are going to be able to, my hope is have a comprehensive plan to the board in November. Yep.
New business. Discussion of zoning ordinances, home occupations.
So I sent you my staff report and the proposed ordinance for home-based business. So as you all are well aware, since those come through planning and zoning, anytime you want to operate a business out of your home, you had to get a special use permit in order to kind of regulate the things that you could do within your home that maybe have to do with noise or parking, how many people are in the house at one time, display of products. So the state legislature last year passed two state statutes that went into effect late last year that basically tell local governments that they cannot do that with some stipulations. So what we've done is draft a ordinance that basically allows home occupation in an R1 district, and then R2 already allows what's in an R1. And then adds the definitions straight from state statute to our definitions of what a home occupation is. And then we added a section on home occupations themselves that basically say you're good to go with your home occupation as long as you meet these stipulations. And then we also kind of ask for some information from them once they establish that home occupation, since we don't necessarily know it'll be there now because they don't have to get a license or a permit. We asked for them to at least let us know what they're doing, because they still have some things they need to do, like if they're selling stuff, pay taxes, one of those type things. So basically, we are instituting an ordinance so that we are in compliance with state statute.
But the request that they tell you
Is a
what they're
request.
doing, it's a request. It's like getting a building permit out in the county.
Correct.
So like if they were doing something that had required more parking or required more, then they would still have to get a permit?
Well, if it fits within these guidelines or these stipulations from the state statute, all customer parking must be located off of any public street, and all home occupations must comply with all parking regulations that we have on the books, then they do not need to come see us. So I'm just going to give you as example, in the past, home salons have needed a special use permit, hairdressers, and sometimes, depending on the off-street parking available, we may be able to limit how many chairs are available.
Yeah.
That's not in here.
So like, that would just be, since they don't have to tell us, that would just be like, hey, I noticed there's a lot of cars here, or you do have a home business.
A neighbor could bring that to our
Yeah.
attention. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's still stipulation within the statute and then incorporated into this that you can't have more people in the building than is allowed to be there.
Yeah, I saw that where it said, can't be more than the occupancy allowed for
Right,
that.
and there's an actual formula to that
Yeah.
calculation.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. Do you need a motion?
I've got one question. So in regards to, I didn't make it all the way through this. So, I mean, understanding that, by the state statute, you have to allow them to sell their goods within the home. Now, what about exterior stuff? Is that limited in what they can have outside of the home?
So the
if they wanted-
statute says in the dwelling or in the yard, but it also stipulates not the front yard.
Oh.
So,
I just remember years ago, we denied a guy a permit because he wanted to open up a little car business at his house on 4th Street. And we ultimately denied it because it was just, there was no parking, there was none of that. I mean, he'd have cars parked all over the place there, so. But by the state statute, you can't limit exterior goods except for the front yard.
So like if they wanted to sell lawnmowers or wood stoves, they can't display them in their front yard?
correct.
If you want to sell eggs, you can have a chicken coop in your backyard.
You would need a chicken permit, but yeah.
So if you were doing an auto repair business, you could do it in your backyard. Okay? I mean, it's what the law is.
Fill in your
Yeah, that's
backyard
the
up,
thing,
Carl.
Yeah.
We
right.
still have other.
Yeah, I'm sure she won't mind.
We have other ordinances on the book that, need to be followed.
Right.
So, but as far as operating the business, yes.
So if a property, I mean, if it were to become a nuisance, in terms of like, doubling back to the repair business, if they had junk cars parked in unlicensed vehicles, is that, there's other ways to protect the neighborhood, the quality of the neighborhood.
Is that an ordinance? Having unlicensed, unregistered vehicles on your property?
Having unlicensed, unregistered, you can have them there for 14 days to work on them outside. If you have them in a garage, yes.
Yeah, but outside.
Yes.
Basically, we've written this, or you've written this ordinance to the fullest legal extent that the state will allow us, is what you...
I ran it past our city attorney, and he thinks it is within the statute. And it gives us a little bit of ability to try and get information from folks so that we know what's going on without violating their rights.
Make a motion to approve.
I have a motion,
Second.
I have a second, a roll call, please.
Gary Roth?
Yes.
Carl Kinski?
Yes.
Justin Donovan?
Yes.
Tina Bryant,
Yes.
Amanda Hutchings.
Yes.
All right, so basically, that has been recommended for approval to the Board of Aldermen. All right,
Discussion zoning ordinance, marijuana-related issues or uses.
so,
One
as
makes
you're
a
all
big-
aware,
Big difference, don't it?
a constitutional amendment passed in November that allowed recreational marijuana use. What we're discussing tonight are the zoning pieces revolved around that, so where can these things take place? Again, in discussion with our city attorney, basically what we've done is add the definitions of what type facilities are able to be, or the type of facilities described in the amendment. How's that? We've added the type of facilities described in the amendment to our code, and then we've put each different use within either C1, C2, I1, or I2. It nearly mirrors the medical marijuana use, except for comprehensive, wholesale. So the new amendment allows a microbusiness wholesale facility, which was different than the medical marijuana uses. And so that was written into I-1 light industrial, whereas other wholesale businesses are possible within C2. So those are all written into code, the definitions are added, and then a few years ago, we added a section 405-201 titled Medical Marijuana-Related Uses, which allows marijuana-related uses within certain distances of schools, daycares, churches. That's all written in the state statute. We mirrored all of that. This basically takes the medical word off of it and just titles the section marijuana-related uses.
So is there no such thing anymore as medical marijuana?
No, there is. There can still be medical marijuana facilities.
Okay.
They were able to be the first ones to apply to be what's called comprehensive, where they can sell recreational and medical.
Okay.
Those licenses will begin being issued next week. And then over the summer, if you want to be what I would call a freestanding recreational marijuana, the amendment defines that as a micro business. You can start applying for those this summer.
Here's the problem that maybe I'm not reading this carefully enough, but here's a problem that I think might exist. So you've got a definition here of marijuana micro-business facility, and you describe it as a micro-business dispensary facility or micro-business wholesale facility. But then if you look at the definition of the micro-business dispensary facility, it talks about providing marijuana to a qualifying patient. So you really are not covering a micro-business retail facility,
It should say,
or at least maybe I'm reading it wrong, but
so it says able to acquire, process, package, store, transport, deliver marijuana products to a consumer, qualifying patient, or primary caregiver. So the consumer part is the part that's new to the definition.
okay, so you added that consumer part?
Correct.
Okay, so that's what why are you calling it, okay, I guess that,
And just so you know, these definitions mirror exactly what's in state statute.
okay. I just
And,
was,
and if there are errors, we can look at it, but that's where they.
no, I mean,
Don't give me credit for writing them by any means.
okay. Okay, so qualifying patient, primary caregiver, or consumer.
Correct. So
And so they added the words "or consumer" to cover retail sales of non-medical marijuana.
that's my understanding.
Okay.
Are these licenses, are they gonna be distributed to however many businesses there are? So
No,
like,
there's a person.
there's like a percentage?
There's a limit of a certain number per congressional district.
Oh, so it's like alcohol sales, be limited?
No,
No.
it's, I don't think alcohol sales is limited.
Oh, really? Oh.
This is,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's basically, I'm gonna say 8, or
Yeah.
grow facilities per congressional district,
Oh,
and
okay.
16 dispensary facilities. Those numbers, don't
Yeah.
quote me on those numbers, but they are limited.
Uh-huh. That's good. Awesome.
Other questions? And again, this one, not unlike home occupations, it's something that has been written into the Constitution, and now, so we need to allow it in our code. And this allows it within those zones that basically mirror medical marijuana uses.
Awesome. I make a motion to approve.
Have a motion?
I'll second.
A second, all in favor? Oh, no, do a roll call, please.
Gary Roth?
Yes.
Carl Kinski?
Yes.
Justin Donovan?
Yes.
Gina Bryant?
Yes.
Amanda Hutchings?
Yes.
Motion carries 503. Thank you.
Discussion of zoning ordinances, tiny homes.
Okay, so last year, the Board of Aldermen discussed, how can we, work towards more dwellings, more residences within, whether that's apartments or homes, within the city. And while there were multiple avenues being pursued, this is one of them. They talked about tiny homes. Tiny homes are currently in a unit. Tiny homes are allowed if you want to seek them through a planned unit development, and I discussed this in the staff report, or through a special use permit called a community unit plan. And we've already adopted tiny home building code into building code, so we have that. But the planned unit development and the community unit plan each have some stipulations on, you have to provide some recreational area. You still have to have 7,500 or 8,000 square feet on your lot to have one, because those are the sizes of lots that we dictate in zoning. So there's just some caveats there on if you want to build, if you're a minimalist and you want to build a small home and you want a small lot, these don't necessarily lend themselves to that possibility. So looking at some other communities that have allowed this, looking at our community and how it could fit, what I came up with was called an overlay zone. So in other words, you would apply for a permit to have this overlay zone allowed either in a mobile home zone currently, which some communities have taken a mobile home park, turned it into a tiny home park, okay? Or any zone that there's residential use allowed in where you have a 4-acre lot or larger. The reason for that is we don't want to allow someone who's a minimalist to come into a subdivision where you have larger homes and larger lot values, and put a tiny home there, even though I'm sure it would be a beautiful tiny home, amongst a bunch of $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes. So what we thought was if you could apply the overlay zone permit to a certain lot, if you had a 4-acre lot, you could, now this goes contrary to what I just told you, you could build a tiny home there. Or you could subdivide it into 4,500 acre lots, 4,500 square foot lots, not acres. And you could build tiny homes and you could have a little tiny home community. Or if you just want to manage it like similar to a mobile home park, you could build tiny homes and you could lease them or rent them.
I guess I'm a little confused because you're talking about, your concern is basically that you're going to have a tiny home in a swanky subdivision. Am I correct that that's your concern?
I think it's
I don't mean
something,
swanky, I mean, I understand
Yeah.
there's a broad range of what that means, but you're going to have a tiny home next to.
not even swanky, even any, like, we have several subdivisions here that are a little older. So I think for the neighbor's concern, would we want to allow a tiny home
But
on
what-
a 8,000 square foot lot amongst a couple of $150,000 homes?
But don't the subdivisions have their own restrictions?
Not all of
Not,
them.
not if they're adopted by the city, unless they have like HOAs.
Right, I mean, don't the HOAs have, not all of them do have HOAs?
But probably only one.
Valley Spring would probably be the only one.
Valley Spring has stipulations.
But none of
Hope
the others
has some on record, but
Okay.
the others
do not?
do
Okay.
not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But
And I wanted
if
to
you look
point
at
out,
what affordable housing, when you put affordable housing in communities, it keeps the property taxes lower and allows older people to stay in their homes longer. Because if the values of the homes keep going up and the property taxes go up, and then older people can't stay in their homes for as long.
Right, but it seems to me that tiny homes may catch on, and they may not catch on, and if they do catch on, and everybody wants a tiny home, then we'll revisit this.
keep in mind,
ordinance.
this doesn't just allow it to happen. They still have to come through here, through the Board of Aldermen.
Oh, yeah.
And you
Okay.
have to dictate these zones. Is that predetermined or it's
As
case
it's-
by case?
As it's written, it would be allowed to apply for in a mobile home zone or on a 4-acre piece of ground within a different zone that allows residential use. So you couldn't do this in an industrial zone. It'd have to be zoned commercial or
And
residential.
then, could you explain again how I'm going to be able to put in my mother-in-law house in the backyard?
So tiny homes, if it is already a primary residence and you want to build a tiny home in your backyard, that's called an accessory dwelling unit because you already have a primary structure there. Accessory dwelling units are already allowed in code. Building of tiny homes is already allowed in code. There are some limiting factors, so you can only cover a certain percentage of your lot. So if you have a small lot, large home, and you have a shed, and you have a detached garage, you may not be able to
Okay.
build an accessory dwelling unit. If you have the lot space, you can already build an accessory dwelling unit.
And the accessory dwelling unit has to be, does it have to be owned by the occupant, or can it be rented to the occupant?
I mean, yeah, I mean, you could, if I own a primary structure, I want to build an accessory dwelling unit, and I want to rent it, I could rent it.
Okay.
Rent,
Right.
not
I know not.
guest lodging.
Right, I know not a B and B, or,
Correct.
but.
You
rent
couldn't
on
do it
the-
or you couldn't do it without a special use permit.
Which one?
With the accessory dwelling, you couldn't turn that into a
B
guest
and B.
lodging.
You could turn it into guest lodging if you had a special use permit within a residential zone.
That answers your question.
Okay. And so keep in mind a couple things. One, this doesn't just allow tiny homes to go in anywhere, right? It guides them into certain locations. It still has them come to P and Z for a permit, and then your recommendation would go to the Board of Aldermen. We have tiny home building code in our code books already, so we have some way of making sure it's built to code, okay? And then in the definition, I wanted to add this, we added some design features that could be included. And the only reason that's in there is to kind of suggest that maybe this board and the Board of Aldermen could ask for some additions. So whether they be dormers or shutters or exterior lighting, just to make sure, to try and help make sure that they aren't just cookie cutter homes right next to each other. This also stipulates that they have to be on a foundation. So you can have a tiny home on a foundation, you can have a tiny home on wheels, but not unlike a mobile home, you can buy one on wheels and then take the wheels off and put it on a foundation. The idea there being that these are meant to be permanent residences, not RVs.
Oh, yeah.
They would also need to be connected to utilities.
And I guess I had a couple of questions about that provision. You say it has to be connected to a utility, so I cannot have an independent solar unit providing the power for my tiny home?
As it's written, no.
Any
You'd have to
particular?
be on grid. You could still have your
Right,
solar.
I mean,
but-
you could have, but you'd be selling your excess electricity to somebody.
Citizens or something.
Okay, and then, and is there, what is the reasoning for that?
For,
Not letting somebody have an independent solar system on their property?
Battery technology is not caught up to
There you go.
what solar is able to produce. So our concern is that over a multi-day period, you'd run out of energy. So then you have a house that isn't occupiable. It's uninhabitable by our code. So we would have to post it and say, out until, you get your son back.
Yeah, because then that'd be a health and safety issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand the position. I'm just thinking that a lot of the people who are interested in tiny homes are interested in being off the grid. And I don't know.
Yeah, but are people that are gonna wanna be off the grid gonna wanna live in the city limits of St. Genevieve?
I think
You know?
some would, but I'm sure some of them would want to
But
live
there's
in.
still ways for them to stay green
Right.
with still being
Well,
connected.
and again, to my thinking, we're going to see whether tiny homes take off or don't take off, whether they're,
Yeah, maybe that's,
I mean,
maybe that's something that we
this is like the
can.
first draft,
yeah.
you know.
Well, this, if you all agree to this, this will go to the Board of Aldermen. I have run it past them in a work session, and they're amenable to this, so it would
Right.
hopefully go into code. Whether it's taken advantage of, like you said, I don't know. We'll have to see. We definitely have some areas where you could put this in place pretty quick.
I understand what you're saying, Carl. You want people to have the freedom of choice, but my concern is, if they kind of fill a void of a low-income housing, there's people who may make that choice to not connect electric, and then, more things are gonna fall into disarray. It's,
Yeah, and then they're having to use alternative methods of
Right.
heating.
I was just curious about the provision. And, I mean,
Sure.
if it's a problem, we'll address it when it's a problem.
Okay.
P and Z can make that choice if you want to make that change. We can send it to the board that way, but that was in internal discussions and with the board.
No, I'm not making a motion to amend this.
Okay.
So jumping to the design features, was that something that's a part of your draft here, these design
It
features?
is, and that can be taken out. I mean, anything can be taken out or amended or added. That was another internal discussion we had. When I looked throughout the United States at these, this was an item that some communities had in place that made for a better buy-in of the owners and renters, instead of having something that they were just going to live in short-term. Having these design features, I think, made it more of a community and more of their home versus just something that they rent. That doesn't mean that we won't have a landlord buy a piece of property and build them and they still be rented. It was just, it became, a structure that was more a piece of who they were.
How are you gonna determine occupancy limits on these tiny homes?
We would use the same formula that we have, and then I believe, written into here, we have, for purposes of tiny home overlay section, occupancy shall not be more than one occupant per 70 square foot of floor space, less for the kitchen and bathroom, which is a minimum of 80 square feet. So if you were to have a 150 square foot tiny home, that would be one person. And then if you were to get to 200, 210, it would be two, and that's how that would work. And we're talking structures typically 200 to 500 square feet.
Who would monitor that? Like, how would we control who comes and goes? That would be my concern.
We wouldn't be able to monitor who comes and goes as far as like visitors or temporary living, if you had a, aunt or uncle who came to stay with you for a while. But when we do occupancy inspections, which is either when someone moves in or out of a structure, or it is actually the final inspection on a building permit, we present them with a certificate of occupancy, and on that math is calculated, and it tells them you can have 2, 5, 10 people live here.
Right. My concern is, if, a family of 2 moves in and adoption or child, like, how do we control that at that point? If we've got 7 people living in a 500 square foot property, I don't know, it's just my concern.
Yeah, but we have that same problem now
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
properties and,
The answer is there's no good way to
I mean-
regulate it, other
Yeah.
than just by issuing that, if you have to reissue that occupancy permit.
Or
It
if
is
there's-
difficult.
and I suppose if a neighbor says there clearly are more than,
But yeah, but
one
proving,
person,
but proving
you
how
can
many people
ascend-
live in a unit is like
oh,
impossible.
it's, yeah, it would be very hard, but, but you could
I
establish.
mean, it's not impossible, it's totally doable.
Well.
Let's move on.
It is difficult, Amanda.
Yeah.
So in regards to the design features, are those requirements?
No. What we did was write it into the definition, so, hold on just a second here. The tiny home design features. Under the site and structure requirements, tiny homes must comply with all applicable state and local codes and regulations, including the Residential Building Code, ICC Tiny House Code, and the Residential Tiny Home Checklist adopted by the City of St. Genevieve. So on that tiny home checklist would be these design features as a suggestion. And then they would come to us with what they want those structures to look like, and you would decide. Again, it's not a requirement. So,
Is it a requirement for them to have a window? Or
Oh, yeah.
just a door?
Yeah. You have to
Window.
have egress, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But the idea is basically being that we'd be more likely to approve something if it had one of these design features.
I think the idea being that you would be more attached to your tiny home if it had certain design features.
But I guess
Wasn't
what,
just a box.
I understand, but we're not requiring them.
Correct,
We're not incentivizing putting them on your tiny home.
correct.
So it looks to me like we're just listing things.
It's a suggestion.
Okay. That, it doesn't even appear anywhere else in the ordinance. It's just saying here are certain home features you could have, like,
Oh,
I,
like,
yeah,
we could say it has to have a pitched roof, it has to have.
right, but we're not saying that in this proposed.
Correct.
And so really, we're just throwing out ideas for these people.
We are suggesting that they do some of these things. There are, I'll tell you, there are,
Otherwise in compliance.
there are
we can't force them.
correct, there are tiny home communities out there that you have to have 3 or more of these, or 4 or more of these.
You can't just.
I didn't go that route for 2 reasons. One, it's just more regulation. And 2, if you're a minimalist, do you want these? I don't know. I'm trying to balance that line of offering more opportunity for people to build residences, but also not make them just cookie cutter residences.
Then why do you have, in the last set bullet point under tiny home features, other design features as agreed upon between the applicant and the administrator? Who's the administrator?
So that would be me.
Okay.
Okay, or whoever's in my position. If a developer were to come or an applicant who just wanted to build 3 or 4 of these and say, I want to apply for an overlay permit, here's a mock-up of what I want to build, I'd like to have some of these design features, but in place of pre-manufactured skylights, I'd like to have solar panels. And I know that that doesn't necessarily make the connection, but you get where I'm going.
So it's still just a suggestion to the
Absolutely.
administrator.
Now, and this may be something that would fall under suggestions, but what about adding wordage like matching the characteristics of the neighborhood? You know, and I guess that would,
It's kind of subjective.
it's very subjective, and like you said, it might fall under just these, under just these design features, because, not everybody wants to add transoms and skylights, because they're expensive,
And again, I want to be very clear, we can just take this completely out, and then I would amend F5 that it just has to abide by local codes and regulations and building code, and that would get rid of it altogether.
I mean, I'm for leaving it, just,
Yeah.
you're suggesting people to make upgrades to the homes, and if you can do that,
Yeah.
I don't see a reason
At
why
least-
not to, it's
At
just,
least then they'll consider, oh, we
Right.
gotta make them look
Could
good,
you
so let's
add-
improve it.
Tiny home design feature options,
I kind of
Or-
think we ought to at least make it clear.
something a little, yeah.
Because I'm just thinking somebody comes in, looks at this ordinance and says, well, I'm not building a tiny home here because I don't
Oh, you
want to.
think it might deter somebody?
I think somebody reading this is going to,
Yeah, like,
Think that we're-
you know,
think
Justin
that
said,
we're
you go ahead
doing
and
this.
transoms, that's money.
yeah.
and I mean, and
Maybe under the, where it says, these design features include the following, and I guess you could put, these design features could include.
I think that
But
right
not
now,
limited
somebody
to the
reading this
following.
is going to think that these are things that they need. to
That's
have.
exactly,
And
so,
up- and up there, you talk about the tiny homes, I'm sorry, under F5.
Correct.
You talk about how the tiny homes have to comply with codes and regulations and this, that, and the other thing, and the residential tiny home checklist.
Which is where
Which
this
is what
would be.
this is.
Yes.
Although it's not labeled the tiny
Correct.
home checklist. So somebody reading this is gonna wonder, what is the tiny home checklist? And then if they're told the tiny home checklist is the tiny home design features, then it reads like it's mandatory.
So what if we change F5 to tiny homes must comply with all applicable state and local codes and regulations, including ICC International Residential Code, ICC Tiny House Code, adopted in section 500.110, and optionally,
I would just delete this.
just get rid of that?
I would just, I would just delete "and the residential tiny home checklist adopted by the city of St. Genevieve." I
Okay.
would just delete that. And,
So
and then with,
do we just take the tiny
'Cause that
home
could
design
be-
features out of the definition?
well, you don't use the phrase, you don't
Correct.
define the phrase tiny home checklist.
That's where I was
So that's
going,
gonna confuse people. So I would suggest eliminating that, because it's really not a checklist.
Is it
You don't
an
have to
option to
tick any
put-
of the boxes. You can tick none of the boxes.
is it an option to put that with the building permit for tiny home?
I mean, what we could do is just take this out, and I do plan to create a pamphlet or something for people who have questions about what they can do, and I could just put in the pamphlet, here are some suggestions of what we add, and then it's completely outside of this
I mean,
process.
I think, I would suggest under F5 that you get rid of and the residential tiny home checklist.
Mhm.
And then, if you want to keep in tiny home design features, you might just want to say.
What ideas
Yeah.
or?
Optional?
It is
tiny
suggested that applicants consider the following, and just leave it at that.
Yeah,
I mean-
like I said, I do agree with what Carl said with removing that, and it's, maybe change that, these design features could include but are not limited to the following.
And maybe just indicating that these are suggested features. So maybe in your, maybe you would get rid of the definition of tiny home features and then add a paragraph 8 under F that says, suggested features for tiny homes may include the following.
The city of St. Genevieve would also encourage the incorporation of tiny home design features into
Or,
this.
yeah, would encourage the consideration of incorporating these features, and just add that as 8 because that way you're making it clear that
A
it's
or
just-
under G?
No, I would get rid of,
Eight under
I would
F.
get rid of this tiny home design features as a defined term.
But
And
leave,
then add an 8 under F, and 8 would be, it is also suggested that the applicant consider the following features.
or some of the following features.
Yes. So that the applicants aren't misled into thinking these are requirements,
yeah.
but also are told, we would like you to consider these things. And if,
Yeah, I agree. I think that sounds good.
One of the other reasons to leave that in there was if it is a planned development, then that gives you those features in front of you. So that you can say, well, you want to put so many on this acreage, well, then you need to give something back. So you need to dress them up. And then you can say, well, here's some of the features that we would like to see included.
right,
Which we could do that anyway, when they present, right?
Another plan development, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but not in the.
But if it's not in front of you, how do you know what you want to ask for? So the idea is that that would also.
Well, I think if we have a paragraph 8, we'll know that these are the features that other communities have asked for, and
Right.
therefore we might want to ask for.
Right, which is why we didn't scratch it out, because we wanted that to be
Okay.
in front of
But
everybody.
but it's a right now, it's a defined term that's nowhere used in the.
Right.
So what I've written down is we would take the defined term out completely. And then under F, we would, well, hold on. Under F5, we would strike "and the residential tiny home checklist adopted by the city of St. Genevieve." Add a number 8 that would state, "The city of St. Genevieve also encourages the following design features be incorporated into a tiny home." And then they'd be bullet pointed.
I think that's okay.
I think so too. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
Do we need a motion, or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd move for that.
I'll second it.
A motion with the changes, correct?
Correct. Motion with those changes.
Amanda, did you catch all the changes?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Did you catch all of the changes?
I did, yeah, I was
Okay.
taking notes, thank you.
All right. I have a motion
And a second.
and a second. Roll call, please.
Gary Roth?
Yes.
Carl Kinski?
Yes.
Justin Donovan?
Yes.
Gina Bryant?
Yes.
Amanda Hutchings?
Yes.
Motion carries 503.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to
Thank you all
adjourn.
very much.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion
This
carries.
is the longest meeting